Okay, so we've gone through the review panel again. Let me express my appreciation for the reviewers. We know it's a lot of hard work, but as Gary mentioned, this is very serious to us, and particularly to me as a brand new director in terms of being able to make sure that we're setting the laboratory on the right course. And so having your diversity of opinions and expertise is really instrumental to this. As Gary had mentioned, there are 3 primary criteria you're all aware of in terms of from the reviewer's perspective. Quality, relevance, and performance. And through this review and prior to the review and the information that we provided to you, we feel that there's hopefully enough information there for you to make your evaluation on these three criteria. There's a number of ways that we feel could contribute to your assessment of these criteria, and so we've provided that information. Of course, if there's anything additional you need, if you find through your reading materials you needed something else, please feel free at any time to let us know. We can dig up that information, hopefully quickly, but depending on what you're looking for, we may have to get back with you on some of those things. Before I go forward, I do want to recognize, as Gary had also mentioned, so being a new director on the job, only 5 months, I can tell you this is probably not one of the first things you want to put on your list is prepare for a lab review, but it's really an opportunity though for you to quickly get spun up on the things that are happening in a laboratory. And so I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Bob Atlas's leadership prior to my coming on board. The things that you're going to see here really are a result of Bob's leadership, working with Molly and prior to that, Alan Leonardi as deputy director. So there's a lot of great work here. I'm thrilled, actually very excited to be at AOML. I think the diversity of the research portfolio here provides some very unique opportunities. And so I'm very much looking forward to that. And so I'll try to articulate some of that in the presentation here. So in addition to the criteria, there's a bit of information I hope you'll consider in terms of providing us feedback that particularly is important to me. And Gary touched on some of these things in terms of what he's already, as he told you, directed me to work on. And that is your feedback on how we can build the collaborations, both internally and externally across the organization, quantifying the value of the research that we conduct within AOML. Enhancing our communication. How do we tell others about the things we're doing? How do we engage and work with our stakeholders and be able to communicate the real breadth of the portfolio that we're engaged in here at AOML? Also, how about our ability to manage the science? So it's one thing to conduct the science, but it's another thing to really understand how are we managing it? Are we using the appropriate tools? Are there other management tools that you might be familiar with that you've seen in other organizations that might be a benefit to us to understand? So I think the management of the science is a very critical element of what we're trying to accomplish here. Also, retaining and building a diverse scientific workforce for the future. And the diversity you can interpret a number of ways, but again, as Gary had mentioned, it's this diversity that I think is really our strength, particularly in this laboratory. And then lastly, helping to us identify those emerging research areas that we should pay a little bit of attention to that might be on your radar, that may not be on our radar. And so I think those are important elements for us to consider in terms of feedback from the review panel. If we start from the top, of course, we're aligned across AOML with those higher level priorities. And so the administration that's come in has set the 2 primary NOAA priorities, of which Tim has now overseen the blue economy side of things and Neil on the Weather Act. But both Blue Economy and Weather Act are our primary priorities as well. And I think the activities that you're going to see, I believe, are relatively well aligned with these priorities. And then as we cascade under the OER, under OER, as Gary mentioned, we really touch on every one of these priorities within AOML. Again, we're one of those diverse laboratories that have a number of activities going on that addresses a lot of NOAA's mission. And I think that provides challenges, but again, as I said, lots of opportunities for us here at AOML. This is not working the best. Yeah, where is that where I started? No. So if we look at AOML's mission, again, we touched on one more, the simulation.
So you're doing that, so then just do that.
We'll do this. Put that down. So AOML's mission, again, as the name implies, is focused on the Atlantic Ocean basin. That's not to say that we do not engage in research in other parts of the globe, particularly on the ocean side of things. And as we know globally, we're looking at climate issues and weather issues. We're talking a global situation. But again, our primary emphasis is in the Atlantic Basin, both Southern Atlantic, Northern Atlantic, as well as the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. We have interactions, of course, in other ocean basins, but again, those to that extent that may influence or affect those processes in the Atlantic Ocean and over the continental US are our primary emphasis. We have expertise and capabilities in observations, modeling, process understanding, and the transition of that research into operations and uses. Within the organization, as you've heard, I'm the lab director. We have Molly as the deputy director. We have our 3 division directors here. We have 3 divisions: Hurricane Research Division, Physical Oceanography Division, and the Ocean Chemistry and Ecosystems Divisions. We round out our complement within the Office of the Director with our Associate Director, Andrew. Darlene's our Administrative Officer. Erica is the Communications Director, and Bob Kohler is the Director of our Computer Networking. So you're going to hear all about each one of these divisions following me, but I'm just going to give you a little taste to kind of set that up. Really, if you look at across our divisions, as I mentioned, the capabilities we have both are in modeling, observations, and process studies. And so you're going to see that woven through each one of these divisions. The Hurricane Research Division has a long-standing history of understanding the processes, but also collecting the observations. They are riding on those NOAA aircraft, producing and collecting data and providing that data for the rest of NOAA, particularly the National Weather Service and those missions, helping the pilots working with NMAO and the Aircraft Operations Center to identify those areas that will be the best places to collect those observations. So their expertise is being used not only after the data is collected, but while the data is being collected. And that information is then shared broadly across all the operational agencies as well as the rest of the world. So that's an important component of what HRD does. They've also been engaged with producing the next generation of hurricane forecast models, working together across NOAA with our Environmental Modeling Center, working closely with our other laboratories to produce that next generation of modeling. Some of the emerging areas you're going to hear a little bit about that are happening within HRD is our use of autonomous and unmanned systems. Tim knows that very well, and that's one of our priority areas, our new initiatives that have been put forward. AOML has been engaged in the atmospheric side of things, but also, as I mentioned it, in the oceanic side of things in terms of unmanned systems. And also, as I mentioned, our recent engagement with NOAA, across NOAA with the NOAA Unified Forecast System. It's this community-based approach to how we're going to generate for the community and both NOAA that next generation of Earth system modeling. Within our Physical Oceanography Division, as the name implies, focused more on the physical oceanography side of things versus the chemical or ecosystem side of things. But again, very strongly based in the collection of global observations, development of platforms, understanding QC processes for this ocean data, transmitting this data, sharing this globally, making it accessible to the global community. So we have a lot of expertise in those areas. We also have expertise in the use of those data simulation, ocean modeling aspects of what we're doing. Part of that activity also relates to some of the things that we've been doing in terms of observation simulation experiments and the ability to assess potential platforms, sensors, prior to them being developed and deployed, if you have a sense of the characteristics of those sensors, et cetera, and the value to the modeling once those are deployed, if they should become deployed. So we're heavily engaged in that on our Physical Oceanography Division. Some of the emerging activities, as I mentioned, are the autonomous underwater vehicles. We've also developed and starting to work out a closer relationship with the National Weather Service as it relates to improvements to the marine weather side of things, with a focus on how we can improve that through our interactions on the physical oceanography side of the house. Some other activities related to the identification and, to the extent we can, prediction and movement of the sargassum, a very important area, of a topical area for us in the tropics, et cetera, and around South Florida as well. And involvement with the biogeochemical or BGC Argo program that's being considered and developed right now. In Ocean Chemistry and Ecosystems Division, these efforts again are based on the collection of data, environmental modeling as well, understanding process studies, focused on habitats and looking at the ecosystem, quantifying the roles of the oceans in sequestering carbon dioxide with the primary focus there, and understanding the feedback that the oceans have in that carbon cycle. Predict forcing pressures, climate change, et cetera, on critical marine ecosystems. That's a very important emphasis of what we're doing, looking at that, particularly in the areas of corals and things like that. And then applying data models and assessment for resource management to support decisions. So working very closely with resource managers and providing them the tools and the information, the data that they need to make the important decisions they need to make. Ocean chemistry is also involved with this BGC Argo program, but also an emerging area within NOAA's omics program, use of genomics and other sensing instruments we're working on, looking at use of genetics to assess what's in the water column and understand what's been there, what's not there, and those kinds of issues. So AOML has been part of that leadership in that. When it comes to conducting the research we do, we cannot do what we do without our academic partners. They are absolutely critical to what we do. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the staffing. But our primary partner is the University of Miami, which is across the street, Rasmus, working with them in terms of all aspects of what we do in AOML. We also have a relationship with the Northern Gulf Institute, with the lead institute of Mississippi State University. So that helps us and works with Gulf issues primarily. Very important partners. Again, we couldn't do what we do without them. They're critical to us, what we do. If you look at our budget, on average, we're about 30 million a year, and we've been fairly consistent. But you can see that that's based really kind of on a 50-50 model. 50% of our budget comes from base that's provided by OAR in those budget categories that Wayne was mentioning from the portfolios. And another half comes from our interaction with other NOAA programs and other federal government programs. This can be provided through competitive announcements that will, or directed funding that we're working directly with a number of our programs. We have a strong relationship with a lot of OAR programs. Climate Program Office that Wayne mentioned before, but the Ocean Observations program led by David Legler. We've had some interactions with our Sea Grant program, certainly with Ocean Exploration, we've worked with them, and the Office of Weather and Air Quality. So again, because of AOML's diverse portfolio, we really rely on the strong interactions we have with those programs, both within OAR, but also within other line offices. And so that's why it's important for us to ensure that we're developing those collaborations. Well, I will make one mention you see at the very top is the Hurricane Supplemental. So the Hurricane Supplemental is funding that NOAA receives, typically one-time funding that's associated with, let's say, a large disaster, a number of hurricanes. The Congress has decided to provide additional funds. NOAA's been fortunate enough to receive some of those funds in order to improve and conduct research that will lead to better forecasts and management of those kinds of situations. So because of AOML's emphasis on hurricane forecasting, et cetera, and our ecosystems associated with damages that occur with hurricanes as well, we've been the beneficiary, fortunately, of some of those funds that we use them. But again, they're one-time funds. They can be challenging to manage, but we're certainly very thankful that we're able to get them. And that helps us to accelerate a lot of the activities that we've been doing before. So I touched a little bit on the money. I talked about the partnerships, but I think what's really most important are the people. So this, at AOML, we have about 150 employees, both combined cooperative institute, contractors, and federal employees. And it's a phenomenal group of people, in my opinion, but I'm just a little biased, I think. But I think it's important because it really comes down to what we can do for our people and the way that we take care of them and the facilities that we provide them in order for them to do the best work that they can do. So that's an important priority for me, and I'll touch on that in a second. But we do have our challenges, as you can imagine, and this is not unique to AOML. This is a problem that we have across OAR. If we look at our distribution of our federal scientists, you can see the age distribution there, that most of our scientists are age 56 or older, and we have very few scientists that we would consider younger that are younger than 35. We can notch that one. We hired a new one last week, so we're excited about that. Jose just joined us as a federal employee from a cooperative institute. So we're thrilled about that. We'll celebrate any success we can. But again, that's something to pay attention to, and we realize that. Our staffing distribution, as I mentioned, is about 50-50. 50% of the cooperative institute employees and 50% of the federal employees. Of course, that distribution can vary from year to year, but it's important that we have a federal workforce that takes some leadership in the activities we do. Of course, there are governmental functions that are necessary to be handled by federal employees. And so right now, the distribution seems to work for us. And I think this is relatively consistent with other laboratories across OAR in terms of this distribution. I will point out at the top that Another one of our challenges going along with that age distribution is that 35% of our federal workforce is already eligible for retirement, and 26 within the next 5 years. Another 26% of our federal workforce is eligible for retirement. We're pretty proud of the 34% that we have in terms of STEM, underrepresented minorities in STEM, and our female workforce is at 31%. We're never happy with the numbers, and we're always trying to improve that, but I think it's a good starting point, and that's also another area that's important for me, and that's in the area of diversity and inclusion. It gets back to our people, and we have to really recognize and take advantage of the opportunities that we have with the diverse workforce that we have. And so we have a number of things that we have established here at AOML. We have a diversity, inclusion, and you program. A couple of those employees will talk with you at lunch to give you a little sense of what that program does. We're actively engaged with a number of minority serving institutions, primarily through NOAA's Cooperative Science Center. I've met with all those directors recently, and we're going to have a workshop down here to introduce them as well as their students to what AOML does and engage them. We have a number of employees that are engaged in minority serving organizations as well as majority serving organizations in terms of diversity and other activities. We're constantly engaged with outreach to different school groups, career fairs, internship programs. Again, as Heidi came over, we're actively engaged in bringing on interns and supporting that next generation of scientists and communicators that we find is important. You've got an exhaustive list of all our honors and awards, and so we're very proud of that. I just mentioned that here, but there's a lot more information for you to see that. In terms of our peer review publications, again, very successful in my opinion. If you look over the trends, we're continuing to increase, and I think this year FY19 was a record year for AOML in terms of the number of peer review publications. And that, keep in mind, was during a 6-week government shutdown. So I think we have a lot to be proud of in terms of our scientists producing peer review publications. You can see we stratified this really by our NOAA authors, which is on the bottom, the Cooperative Institute only authors in the center, and then at the top is the combined effort. So it gives you a sense to some degree of the interactions that we have both with the Cooperative Institute and then in some cases where it might just require an individual affiliation with one or another of the organizations. We enjoy quite a bit of citations from our authors and very well-known publications. You can see these are in the last 5 years, some of our recent most cited research. You can see them across the board. These in particular are focused very much on our data collection, ecosystems, ocean chemistry, and physical oceanography, but as well in the hurricane research divisions, we enjoy numerous cites from a number of very high-level journals, and that information has also been provided to you. The diversity of the community that uses our data and uses our research is also, again, very diverse. This gives you a sense of the various disciplines and parts within the community that are actually citing AOML's research. So again, we're not producing science as a benefit to one particular discipline. We're actually producing science that's providing multiple disciplines with information and is being used quite extensively. As Gary mentioned also, one of the things, we don't just conduct research. This is not the University of NOAA at OAR, and that is certainly the case at AOML. Our focus is, in addition to conducting the research, is to transition that research. So that's a very important priority for me here at AOML, given my background and experience in terms of conducting transitions and helping to manage them in previous positions. So this gives you a little flavor. Within NOAA, we've gone to a policy that really adopts a nomenclature for following transitions, which is similar to the technical readiness levels, or TRLs, that NASA and other agencies use. We call them readiness levels, since they don't just follow technology. We have other types of transitions. And so these are our RLs, meaning RL1 would be the most basic research, going out to RL9, in which RL9 is an actual transition. And so if you look at across our portfolio, you can see that we have a heavy emphasis on the higher RLs, those closer to observations, but we also have investments in the early RLs as well. We need to have that sustained investments in early RLs in order to obviously produce what we need in the future. So we can't take our eye off the ball in terms of our ability and need to fund research in lower RLs too as well. Of those 32 in the readiness level category 7 to 9, 15 of those resulted in a transition in that period. Our outreach numbers, I think, are also very significant, as you mentioned here. The number of people we reach in terms of our open houses and our school visits and internship, et cetera, 129,000 since 2015 in terms of our outreach there. Our outreach through social media is continuing to increase significantly, particularly since we have the new website, and I've got additional emphasis on our social media interaction. And we've supported since 2015, essentially 115 postdocs, scholars at cooperative science centers in terms of the minority served institutions. So we're continuing to increase that and have quite a bit of engagement, obviously, with the community. I will mention a few key aspects of our web performance. Again, we released the website the day after I started, which was great. Now I can take all the credit for it, and no, I can't take any credit for it. It was a great team led by Erica and others in the laboratory and our divisions who have really put a lot of effort into this. And I know Tim looked at it very early on, and we've gotten very positive responses. Hopefully, I'm assuming all of you have looked at it as well. It's a significant transition for us, but I think we're seen as a very high payoff. And so we intend to use that as a very important tool to communicate our research, but not only to communicate the research, but to share our data and share that information. That's very important for us to develop with the community. So you see a number of statistics here. We're also trying to keep track of how many people are clicking through our website, whereas in the old website, I think we had about a click-through of about 86%, in the 80s, I think it was. Bounce rate, sorry, the bounce rate, where if you clicked and you didn't find anything, you just moved to the next place. Okay, so we had a bounce rate of about 80%. Now we're down to what, 3%? Yeah, 6%. So it really shows when a little bit of effort you can put into that kind of thing makes a difference. We know that we're delivering information that the public and others really are looking for. So let me touch up on the few last minutes that I have left here. So I've been here about 5 months, and that's about the time when leadership needs to start thinking about what's the priorities. You said, what's your assessment so far? I want the employees to understand that, by working with them, by engaging them, listening to them, talking to people, our partners across NOAA, our line office within OAR, et cetera. So I've identified 3 priorities that I find are important. I look for your feedback. If you feel that these are good, bad, should be realigned, whatever, I look for that kind of feedback too. These are not written in stone, but again, the first step for me to identify those priorities to work with across our laboratory. And these are in order of importance. And as I mentioned before, I think people. So people are a very important priority for me at the laboratory. I think it's important that we, again, as I mentioned, incorporate diversity and inclusion in our lab culture. It's not just a thing we talk about. It's not a box that we check. It really comes into the way we make decisions, the way that we talk about these things. We want to make sure that we have a fair, inclusive, transparent decision-making. As an employee, everyone has been on the other side where you just wonder, why was that decision made? So to the extent we can, I want to work toward a transparent environment. Focus on employee performance, training, recognition. These are all very important aspects of what need to go into ensuring that people feel appreciated, because they should, for the great work that they're doing. So I'll focus on people first and foremost. Secondly, a focus on the science, a priority. I want to make sure that we have a facility here that really supports the great work and the intellectual minds that we have at this laboratory. I want people to want to come to work. I want people to enjoy coming to work every day, the people they work with, but they need to have the right facility. They need to have the right resources, and they need to have the right tools to do the work that they do. So there'll be a focus on that in terms of science. Increase our collaborations and our emphasis on transitions. Those are very important aspects of what we do in terms of the research. And lastly, incorporate more social science in what we do. We realize that there's an important aspect of getting the information out to others, but you have to include an element of social science that we'll do. And lastly, communication. We can do all the great work in the world, but if we're not able to communicate that, translate our information, and provide it to others, we're really missing out on a great opportunity. So there will be an emphasis and priority on the communication, on the way that we communicate our science and with whom we communicate that work. Last couple of slides here. So this all does not come without challenges, of course. And through the next couple of days, you'll be exposed to some of this. I've asked our folks here to not hold back too much when it comes to maybe some of the less favorable information we might share with you, because I think it's important to get an honest assessment from you in terms of what we can do to make sure that we can address some of these issues. So we have an aging facility. This is a good example. This is our largest conference room, essentially, where we can bring people together. We have access across the street to University of Miami. They have a very large auditorium, so we have access to those facilities, but on the premises, we do not. Again, this is a building, and Andrew will talk about this a little bit. We own this building. This is not a GSA lease building. We don't call someone up, the landlord, to come fix the plumbing. We fix the plumbing, we fix the roof. We do all those things in this laboratory, and we're responsible for doing that with the budget that we're given. The flat budget, that's not gonna change, I don't think. Now, we can be optimistic and hope, as Tim mentioned, to get additional resources, but that's not something we can always plan. So we're always considering two scenarios. Yes, we'd like to see increases, but right now the historical trends show that we'll have a flat budget. How do we work with that? Greater competition for scientific talent. We see that even today. As the private industry becomes more engaged with research activities, they have larger pocketbooks, and it's harder sometimes for us to compete with salaries that are being offered by others. But so far, because of our mission, we're still able to maintain people and their excitement and interest in coming to work for us here at AOML. The evolving role of government scientists in this environment where, as I said, the private sector has taken a larger role, and we have more and more collaborations. What is the real role of the federal scientists now moving forward? And then how do we sustain flexibility and innovation in the environment? That's something that's going to be critical to us being successful for the future. And with that, that ends my presentation.